Hello, grade 11 learners! Welcome back to our series on oral communication in process. Again, this series talks about the different lessons you have in oral communication, and this is our second video which deals on the different models of communication process. In the last video, we have discussed about the nature and process of communication. We were able to trace back how people used to communicate through pigeons, horses, and other symbols in connection to our differentiation on the verbal and non-verbal cues. We mentioned during the last video that verbal communication is done through the use of words, so it can be in oral or in written discourse. On the other hand, non-verbal communication is achieved through symbols, facial expressions, body language, and signs. There, we were able to talk about oculesics, which is the communication through the use of your eyes. We also tackled about proxemics. And of course, we also dealt on the different symbols and signs that we use to communicate. For this video, again, we will be focusing on the different models of communication process. When we speak of models of communication process, you have to understand that there are three. The first one is the linear model. The second one is the interactive model. And the third one is the transactional model. These are the things that we're going to discuss in this video. Again, these are linear, interactive, and also the transactional model. When we speak of the different models of communication, I will be showing you different models which will discuss these different types of communication. Our first model, my dear grade 11 learners, is linear. When we say linear communication, you have to remember that it is one way. And it is focusing on the transmission of a message to a receiver who never responds or has no way of responding to the information conveyed. Again, I would like to make an emphasis on that. The message comes from the sender and ends with the receiver. That's why we say that linear communication is one way. For instance, a competition organizer is presenting the contest mechanics, and the message is final and cannot be contented at all. Meaning to say, you don't have the opportunity to ask your question or to clarify something about the mechanics of that particular activity. So it is a form of linear communication. Furthermore, it could be the president giving the State of the Nation address on the national television, or a student who reads a poem or tells a story in front of an audience in a school program. Look at these examples, because you will find out later on that these examples all speak of linear communication. Another example is when somebody sends you an email and you don't have the opportunity to reply to that email, or when you read a blog, or even the traditional way of having letters sent. Meaning to say, once the message has been sent by the sender, it ends with the receiver when the receiver decodes the message. It ends there. There is no way that they create an interaction. And for the linear communication, my dear learners, the model that we're going to use is the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. You have to remember that Shannon and Weaver are two different personalities, but they agreed to come up with one model of communication, particularly on linear communication. That is why this model that you can now see on your screen is called the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. In that model, you can see there the source, the transmitter, the channel, the receiver, and the destination. Also, you will see in the next line the message, the signal, the perceived signal, and of course, the message. And you can also observe there noise, which we now consider one of the barriers to communication. The Shannon-Weaver model, my dear learners, is an example of a type of communication. And it is considered as the mother of all communication models. Again, you have to bear that in mind, that the Shannon-Weaver model is considered as the mother of all communication models. It has a way, or it has a one-way process starting from the source. Okay, you can actually see that in your screen right now. It has a source, which is the producer, or who is the producer of the message. Passing through a channel, the message passes through a channel, which is considered the signals adapted for transmission, which may at times be interrupted by noise or barrier, to a receiver who decodes the message from the signal. The process stops after the message has arrived its destination. So that's simple. By analyzing the Shannon-Weaver model, it's really linear because it starts from the source, or it starts from the sender, and it ends to the destination, or it ends to the receiver. Okay? It's one way. From the sender or from the source to the receiver or the destination, and the communication process ends there. So there is no way that the receiver will be able to give a feedback to the sender. Okay? That is linear communication using the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. Our second type of communication is interactive. Alright? It is an interactive communication. Why interactive? You have now to understand that interactive approach is a two-way communication. Alright? Compared to the linear approach that we discussed earlier, which is one way, the interactive approach is a two-way communication process where a response is given after a message is sent. Again, where a response is given after a message is sent. The recipient of the action intentionally or unintentionally gives a feedback associated with the information received. Okay? The recipient of the action intentionally or unintentionally gives a feedback associated with the information received. Now, let's extract Griselda and her mother's dialogue from the story. Okay? Griselda said, "Nanay, I can smell the aroma of your best delicacy, adobo." Aling Terry replied, "Yeah, I know. It is the favorite of the family, so adobo is what I prepared today." And Griselda in response said, "I can't wait to taste it." So you can see now that there is an interaction between Griselda and Aling Terry. Okay? Between Griselda and Aling Terry. Here, Aling Terry's response to Griselda's statement proves that she decodes the intended meaning of the idea passed on to her. That she was able to understand the message of Griselda saying that she can smell the aroma of the adobo being cooked by Aling Terry. That is what we call the feedback, which is not present in the linear model. Okay? The feedback, my dear learners, is not present in the Shannon-Weaver model or in the linear communication model. The feedback is not present. You will now realize here that feedback makes a difference, because the feedback would actually allow the interlocutors to be able to make the message really understood. If the mother did not respond to the statement of her daughter in the conversation we had earlier, the latter would not know whether her mother understands what she said. And the exchange of ideas or information verifies that both parties understand the message. Remember that one of the main purposes of communication is to affect understanding. So when someone gives a feedback, through the feedback, you would be able to assess whether that person was able to understand the message you sent or the other way. Now, let's take a look at the model you now see in your screen, and we call it the Scrum Model. Alright? The Scrum Model. This is one of the most typical models that we actually use when we speak of the communication models. So we see here the encoding of the message. Of course, that comes from the receiver. The encoding of the message, and the message goes to the receiver. The receiver decodes and interprets the message. And when that person, or when the receiver understands the message, he will now also encode his feedback and send that message to the sender. So you will now see the interaction. So when the sender gives a message like, "Hello, have you eaten?" When that person understands and responds with, "Yes, I am done," that means that they were able to affect understanding, that they were able to understand the message of one another or each other. Right? So that is the Scrum Model. And to further explain on that, the Scrum Model visualized the process of communication as an exchange of thoughts and ideas. Feedback was added to the Shannon-Weaver model. I told you earlier that in the Shannon-Weaver model, there is no feedback. So it is one of the things that is now included in the Scrum Model. The recipient of the message decodes it and creates a feedback based on his understanding of the information sent and vice versa. That's why we can now see that interaction really happens. The figure identifies the 6 elements of communication, which are the sender, the message, the receiver, the feedback provided by the receiver and sent back as response to the sender, and the process of encoding and decoding. Okay, those are the 6 elements which are present in this model. Remember, information may become useless if it is not conveyed properly to others. Thus, the processes of encoding and decoding are the key components of this model, including feedback. Because both would actually encode. But who encodes first? The first one who actually encodes is the sender of the message. Does the receiver also encode in this model? Yes. And what does the receiver encode? He encodes the feedback which he is going to respond to the sender. So both parties in this particular model have the chance to encode. Hence, the receiver must be able to send feedback to the sender in order to complete the process. Otherwise, the communication transaction fails. So if the receiver was not able to give a feedback, that means that it did not affect understanding. Scrum's model is a two-way communication model, revolves around these principles. The process goes on starting from the sender, who encodes the message transmitted to the receiver, which he interprets, decodes a message, which is now considered as the feedback, to be sent back to the source, who in turn decodes and interprets the information sent. So both parties in this particular model encodes, and both of them also decode. Alright? The third one, my dear learners, is the transactional model. You have to understand that one of the characteristics of communication is that it is also dynamic. It has a complex nature, right? It has a complex nature. It takes place among individuals or at any given time with any given subject or topic. However, there are tendencies that barriers would interfere, which may create a sudden impact and change in the processing of information. In a classroom setting, for example, of course, you should reminisce the your experiences during the face-to-face classes. In a classroom setting, for example, you are being grouped into 5 or 6 members for an activity. Your task is to give an opinion or reaction to the closure of the biggest television network in the Philippines. Of course, we all know what that network is. Each of you expresses your thoughts regarding the matter. While having the activity, you also heard the junior high school graders having their dance practice for the upcoming event. That noise did not interrupt your discussion as you give your own views. This situation is an example of transactional approach. Why? Because the communicator in this model, the communicator encodes the message and transmits it through a channel. The message transmitted may be affected by noise, The receiver or the recipient of the message decodes, processes, and filters the message for understanding and is now ready to give his own feedback to the sender. So in the model that you can see in your screen right now, that is the called the transactional model. The transactional model, my dear learners, shows a circular process of interaction between the persons involved in the communication, with each one actively participating and sharing ideas with one another. They are the communicators actively exchanging information and feedback. Here you can actually see that it's not just confined with two interlocutors, because this in this model there can be more than 2 interlocutors already. And you also have to remember that feedback is given freely and deliberately to one another and to all the members participating in the communication transaction. The sender and the receiver may simultaneously exchange roles as communicators. Like if I can be the sender at this moment, later on when somebody speaks in the group, I will also become the receiver. So that particular role is now given to all members of that particular group. In this concept, the noise or barrier to communication is also taken into consideration, for it may directly or indirectly affect the smooth flow of communication. In the event that the message was not clear or clearly conveyed due to the barrier, the communication continues in order to clarify the intended meaning of the sender. So, you now have the chance to clarify, to ask question. Okay, compared to Shannon Weaver, that is not allowed. Okay, that is not part of that communication model in the Shannon Weaver. And when the transmission is cut along the way due to the barrier, the communicators work collaboratively to understand each other. Now, the sender becomes a receiver of a feedback, and the receiver also acts as the sender, providing information in response to the message conveyed him, and in this way, the communication is made more effective and complete. Again, we have to differentiate these three. The Shannon-Weaver model is linear. Okay? The message comes from the sender, sends the message, and it ends with the receiver. That's Shannon-Weaver's model. That's linear communication. An example of this is when Mel Chanco or Mike Enriquez or Corina Sanchez delivers a news report on television. Whatever you wish to say cannot be given back to these news reporters. So that means that the moment you heard the news, you watched the news, and the message reached you, it ends there. The communication ends there. That's the model by Shannon Weaver, which is linear communication. The second one is interactive model, and the model we use is the Scrum Model. Here, there are two persons involved. The message comes from the receiver, goes to the sender. The sender provides a feedback. Okay? So, the cycle is is present in that particular model. So that's Scrum Model, and that is interactive model. And the third one, my dear learners, is the transactional model, where more than two interlocutors are involved. And they take the roles of being the receiver, the sender, depending on how they would want to reach understanding. Because the purpose why these particular people in that group communicate is for them to affect understanding, for them to be able to understand one another. Okay? So, that's it, my dear learners, for the different models of communication. You have there the different activities in your module. The first activity is the modified Venn diagram. Okay, there are three circles. Parts of it are overlapping, because in those overlapping areas of the circles, you will be able to place there the similarities of the different models to communication. Okay, so you have their linear, interactive, and transactional. And then you also have the crossword puzzle. And those are the things that you need to accomplish after watching this video. Alright? So, next meeting, my dear learners, we will be dealing with the different strategies to avoid communication breakdown. Again, in the next video, we will be dealing with the different strategies to avoid communication breakdown. Alright, so I hope you get excited. And again, for those who have not yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to this channel so that you get updated whenever we have new uploads. Again, this is our series on oral communication in context, where I will be discussing to you the different lessons you have in oral communication in context using the module from the Department of Education, which is of course MELT-based. When we say MELT-based, it is based on the most essential learning competencies. So take care, everyone. Always make sure that your hands are clean, and always follow the minimum health protocols, like wearing your face mask, your face shield when you need to do some errands outside, and of course, always observe social distancing. Always remember that your dreams are bigger than this pandemic. Again, thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.